Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you're here for turtles, you're in the right spot. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two. And any of you who've come to some of our Harris Center Zooms know that we love to hear in the chat where you're zooming in from and maybe share a sign of spring or a turtle sighting if you've been lucky enough to have one of those so far this spring. And then we'll just give it another minute for folks to log in and join us before we get started. And this is Brett from the Harris Center. I have kind of a disembodied voice because I'm having tech issues with and they're a little better if my video is turned off. But welcome, everyone. Seems like folks are seeing painted turtles. I was really excited to see some huge snapping turtles foraging in Peterborough a few weeks ago. They were some of the biggest turtles I've seen. It was really great to have them out and about. All right. Nate, you can still hear me okay?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, awesome. So maybe I'll get started with some welcomes and sort of Zoom reminders bef while people are still signing in. This is Brett Thielen from the Harris Center, one of the partners that's bringing you tonight's program. And you've been on many Zooms before, I'm sure, but I just want to remind you that this Zoom is being recorded so we can share it on YouTube for anyone who's not able to make it in real time. If you don't want to appear in that video at all, the best thing to do is to turn off your video. And if, like me, you're having issues with unstable or slow internets, then the video, turning off your video can help with that as well. We have closed captioning enabled. You can decide for yourself whether you'd like to see those captions or not. You might have to poke around a little bit. It might be under more. You can see show subtitles or hide subtitles. And we have turned off the ability for you to unmute yourselves. We're asking everyone to please put questions in the chat. And I will be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the evening and gathering questions to pose during the Q&A period. So I think that's it for our Zoom. Everything's still good with the audio? Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. Cool. So welcome, everyone. As I said, I'm Brett Thielen from the Harris Center for Conservation Education. We are one of the partners in the Monadnock Region Turtle Conservation Initiative, which is a real powerhouse coalition of a bunch of organizations coming together to help protect turtles in our region, led by the Cheshire County Conservation District, also the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commissions, New Hampshire Fish and Game, New Hampshire DES, NRCS, and Moosewood Ecological. So a whole bunch of really talented and passionate people coming together to protect turtles in our region. And I should also mention that this initiative is supported by the New Hampshire State Conservation Committee's Moose Plate grant. So if you have a moose plate, you are helping to support turtle conservation in our neck of the woods and throughout New Hampshire. And for those of you who might be new to this project, we're in the second year now, but it has a four-part focus. The first is some data collection looking at wetland and road crossings, places where turtles might really be suffering from roads and roadkill, and following that up with a road mortality monitoring assessment. This is to help identify places where we can make a difference through things like fencing or turtle tunnels. And we're also a big part of this project is education. So kind of helping people learn about turtles and at-risk turtles in particular in our neck of the woods and what you can do to support your local turtles. And so on that note, I want to mention our next workshop, which is in person on June 8th in Walpole at Reservoir Woods. And this is looking at turtle habitat management, some of the things that Reservoir Woods has done to help improve wildlife habitat or improve habitat specifically for turtles, and sharing ways that you can do that on your own land. So that's June 8th, and I'll put a link in the chat, and we hope any of you who are local will join us for that. So with that, I'm going to kind of just get us over to tonight's talk, which I've been looking forward to for many months. One of the great things about this turtle conservation initiative and about community science in general is that we all have a role to play, and we can all help. We can all help support our local turtles, whether it's stopping to help a turtle cross the road or contributing data to turtle conservation projects to help inform these projects. And so that's what we're going to learn about tonight. Maybe you stopped to help a turtle cross the road. Maybe you saw a turtle crossing your trail on a hike and you took a picture, and because it was so cool to see that turtle, well, you can turn that picture into really useful data for regional and state turtle conservation efforts. And so that's what we're learning about tonight. We have New Hampshire Fish and Game turtle biologist Josh Megyesy here with us to talk about the state reptile and amphibian reporting program, and also Harris Center naturalist Nate Marchessault, who's going to talk about iNaturalist, which is a different kind of platform for reporting your turtle sightings and other sightings as well. And they're going to tell you what you need to know to get out there this spring and start sharing your turtle sightings for conservation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Josh.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Brett. Thanks everybody for coming. So I'm Josh Megyesy from New Hampshire Fish and Game non-game and endangered wildlife program. I've been at the program for, well, it's been since 2014, where I started working on turtle projects. My specialty is at-risk turtle species, state threatened and endangered turtles. So I work with blandings, spotted eastern box, and wood turtle. So I guess just to start, the non-game program, if you're not aware, is within the wildlife division at New Hampshire Fish and Game, but we operate a little bit differently. We are basically responsible for conserving all the species that are not hunted or fished for. So we have 30 endangered species, 21 threatened species, 62 species of special concern, and then all the other species that are, anything from mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish. We manage in one way or another, or we collect data from the public on that. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. In all of my slides, I do have links there that you can access, like the threatened and endangered species list. Feel free to grab a screenshot or a picture of it. And I can also make these slides available afterwards as well. And it is being recorded too. So the non-game program operates a little bit differently within the department. We, as you can see from this pie chart, we rely heavily on federal grants. Most of them are competitive state wildlife grants or state wildlife grants specific to a particular taxa or species. The next largest chunk of our revenue comes from the moose plate and conservation license plate. So if you have one of those, thank you. And then private donations make up another large chunk of our program. And so we rely on all of that. We get a very small amount from the state general fund and some other sources of revenue, but that's where that's kind of where we come from. So we operate a little bit more like a nonprofit than we do a state agency. All right, so getting into turtles, and then I'll talk about reporting, but I just wanted to give an overview of the turtles that I work with and what you would expect to see in New Hampshire. So we have 7 species of native turtles. There's a couple others that show up that are non-native from time to time, but they're not really considered an invasive species yet. So Blanding's turtle is state endangered. Eastern box turtle, state endangered as well. spotted turtle, state threatened, wood turtle, conservation concern, and then snapping turtle, painted, and musk turtle are not listed and considered secure for the time being. So you'll notice that over half of our turtle species are listed of some sort, have some sort of protection status. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get to the reporting part of it, but just some overview on the listed species. So Blanding's turtle is our most reported species actually. It's also where all the people are in the state. So the southeastern part of New Hampshire is where they're found. They kind of cut off up around the lakes region, up where I am. And then they sort of also trickle off towards the western part of the state. This is a species that I've spent many years working with, so monitoring and implementing conservation plans. So I mentioned competitive state wildlife grants. These are grants from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're 3-year grants usually, and they provide us the money to, hire seasonal staff and for me to get out and get equipment and monitor intensively for over 3 years. And we try to, with all of the listed species, we try to resample our populations that we know of and the highest priority populations every 5 years so that we can detect any trends, whether that's positive or negative, and where we can, direct our conservation efforts. But Blanding's turtles are, they're a wetland species. They rely heavily on a diversity of wetlands, not just one type. So they need forested wetlands and shrub swamps. They need vernal pools, and they need uplands for nesting. So exposed sandy areas where they'll lay their eggs. So they use a large mosaic of habitats, and they move regularly throughout that habitat. Many of the turtles that I've used radio transmitters on have moved up to a mile in a single season and then back throughout that period of basically April to September. So that's just an idea of how they operate. They're the greatest threats to Blanding's turtles are roads, development, commercial and residential, and wetland dredge and fill, things like that, anything that changes their habitat. Wood turtle, my personal favorite, are a stream turtle, and they are statewide. So they go all the way up to the Canadian border and beyond. And they rely on slow moving, sandy, gravelly streams with a fairly intact floodplain. They're a very semi-aquatic, semi-terrestrial species. So they overwinter in the streams, and they spend a good deal of time moving up and down the streams. But then once things really warm up, they go into the uplands, the floodplains, and the associated forests, and they spend most of the summer there. But same thing, like right now, it's early spring and we're getting it out and we're doing stream surveys for wood turtles before they really get out into the woods and become hard to find. And the threats for all these species are the same. You'll see that roads, wood turtles is slightly different because they tend to be in these streams where we have where there tends to be a lot more farming, agriculture, and like hay fields. So they can experience mortality from that kind of equipment more than Blandings or spotted turtles would. They're also prized in the illegal pet trade. I'm not going to get into that too much, but we're just watching them carefully. Eastern box turtles are terrestrial species, and they're really limited to the southern part of New Hampshire. There's some in the seacoast. There's some along the Connecticut River. But the greatest, the populations that we monitor are really right down on the Massachusetts border. And the turtles that we've actually been able to find, we put radio transmitters on them, and we track them in order to find more, but also to study their habitat and how they're using that habitat. And we're doing a little bit of augmentation. So we're captively raising some individuals to be released back into the population because there's so few of them. They need a little bit of a boost. And so if you raise them in captivity, they get a little bit larger. Their shells are a little bit harder. They stand a better chance of survival long term when you do that. So that's ongoing. And their threats are the same, but they really prefer these upland forests, dry oak pine type forests, shrubby areas, so forest field edges and power line rights of ways are used in several of their habitats. And spotted turtle, the range of spotted turtle is very similar to Blanding's turtle. So they're southeastern species mostly. They go a little bit further north and a little bit further west, but low densities of them in those areas. And they, same thing, they rely on a diversity of wetland types, heavily used vernal pools for foraging and mating. And we are in the process in the next week or so, we'll be putting live traps out to capture some spotted turtles in areas where we know them to be and sort of monitoring their populations. So that will be starting up again very soon. Okay, so why should you report turtles to us, to the state, to the New Hampshire Fish and Game? So the first thing is species distribution maps. And so these maps you will see on our website under each species. They're also in our wildlife action plan that we just released the new updated version in 2025. That's available online with all our species profiles, distribution maps, threats, actions, you name it, and all kinds of other tools on there. But the species distribution maps are important. And I have these two on here because they're really the most common reptiles we have in the state, painted turtles and garter snakes. They are both statewide, and you can see all the dark areas here are where we have reports. The gray ones are either older reports or low confidence reports. And but the reality is every single town in New Hampshire, from border to border, has garter snakes and painted turtles. They just haven't been reported to us yet. So these maps aren't really accurate in terms of their full distribution. These should be fully dark gray. And so getting accurate information to fill out, to fill in these maps is critical. And for the rare species, it's even more critical. So before starting any of our monitoring for like Blanding's turtle, for example, we relied heavily on the public reporting sightings to us, because that's really where we were able to like pinpoint areas where, okay, we're seeing a strong signature that there's a larger population there. We may want to go monitor that. And that's how we identified some of these areas. And then we went in and we did, we used live traps in these large plots in different wetlands, and we were able to get population estimates and create conservation plans. And so without the public input, we would have been kind of blind. We would have, we have a good sense of what kind of habitat they use and what part of the state, sort of, but it would have been shooting from the hip in a lot of ways, because it would have probably, we would have spent a lot more time putting traps out in areas where they probably weren't there, or at least in very low densities. So all of our information that we collect from the public, from our monitoring and research, goes into conservation plans for each species. And so we have these fairly large conservation plans. Those all feed into a larger conservation area network. So for each species, we recognize that we don't have, we have Blanding's turtles, but they range from Maine out to New York and down to Pennsylvania. And so we want to be managing their entire Northeast population, not just New Hampshire. Same thing for wood turtles. They range all the way down to Virginia, and spotted turtles range all the way down to Florida. So we work collaboratively to create these conservation area networks. These groups of state agencies, we get together and we use our data to create best management practices that are used for a variety of different things. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And so it also, all of this information gives us the best information in order to make decisions on where to direct land protection. So we don't protect land as a state agency. We rely on our partners, land trusts, other federal agencies, and individuals. The more habitat we can protect, the less likely we're going to have issues of road mortality, fragmentation, human wildlife interactions, and increased subsidized predation. So like more raccoons as things get developed. Another big part of the reporting program is that information becomes, it gets used in our state database. So the Natural Heritage Bureau houses all of our rare species data. When somebody applies for a wetland permit or an alteration of terrain permit, when there's a rare species record there, it triggers a review. And so we used to be solely responsible for those reviews in New Hampshire Fish and Game, but now it's all done through Department of Environmental Services. And so they rely on us to provide the expert opinion, but they're the ones that are giving the recommendations on these permits and the conditions on these permits. And so, you know, the ultimate goal there is to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to a rare species like a Blanding's turtle. And so there's a whole range of different conditions that we can apply to these permits. It could be buffers on wetlands. It could be seasonal timing of heavy equipment use. It could be silt fencing off an area so that they can do construction, but turtles can't come in and potentially be harmed by heavy equipment. So that's a big part of what that data is used for. Another thing is identifying road mortality hotspots, and Brett mentioned this turtle initiative, where, you know, we relied heavily on just public observations of turtles on roads to identify areas that were likely hotspots. And then Moosewood Ecological went out and actually assessed some of these crossings to see, you know, if they were, you know, if a culvert was, you know, enough for a turtle to pass through, if it was not, and, you know, what the conditions were like in that particular area where there was a rare turtle species. And so we you know, we're not out doing road mortality surveys. We just don't have that capacity right now, but so we rely on the public for that. And it's also directed us to some of our monitoring areas as well, because that's where people are actually seeing animals. They're seeing them on the roads, they're seeing them on trails or their own yards. So that's a really helpful bit of our information that we collect from the public. It also allowed us to develop guidelines, specific guidelines for wetland crossings. And so this was a partnership with UNH, DES, and us to create like actual guidance in terms of like culvert size, culvert length, fencing, daylighting, openness ratio, all these different factors that would increase the likelihood of a turtle passing through that structure and not going up over the road. So this you can find on our website, and we're applying this to all the rare turtle species because it really fits all of them. This just happened to be Blanding's turtles because that's where we were working at the time, and that's where the funding was coming from and for. But the Turtle Initiative is also using this and was using this as part of the assessment for the Cheshire County wetland crossings. And I just want to give a plug to New Hampshire Turtle Rescue. If you do find a turtle that's been hit by a car and it's still alive or is injured from other reasons, New Hampshire Turtle Rescue is there are at-risk turtle rehabilitators. So they're the only ones that can handle Blanding, spotted wood turtle, and eastern box turtle. They do an excellent job. They're an amazing organization. And anyway, there's their information. Get in touch if you find an injured turtle. Many times a turtle can look really, really bad if you find it on the road. A lot of people will assume that it's just dead or it's not going to make it, but they can survive some pretty catastrophic shell fractures and things. And New Hampshire Turtle Rescue does a great job getting them back on their feet and back out into the wild, which is critical. Okay, so how to report. So we used to have a website that was similar to iNaturalist or something, where you would go in, you would log in, and you could fill out your reporting, upload photographs. It would give you a map of your sightings. That website is currently down. We don't have funding right now to revamp that. So we're relying right now on people emailing us their reports. And so it's a PDF online, and you can email it to raarp@wildlife.nh.gov. Again, the wildlife sightings website is just, it's up there, but it's not functioning. So I would not use that. And then you can also put it in the mail. And their QR code there, you can scan it on your phone and it takes you right to the form and you can enter everything right in there. So that's the best way we have right now of collecting data. Unfortunately, there's other things in the works, but this is where we're at. And so we need, as much input as we can get. And unfortunate that that site isn't working, but hopefully we can get something going soon. And I just want to throw out that there's other initiatives in, whether it's New Hampshire Fish and Game or UNH, where citizen science is critical. So the Bat Project, people can sign up to do bat counts in the summer. If they have barns or old structures, you can count bats going in and out. And there's the link for that. That really helps us monitor the health of some of these bat populations, especially in light of what's happened with white nose syndrome. There's also the New Hampshire Butterfly Monitoring Network. This is a partnership with iNaturalist, but this one has been very successful. And this is kind of a cool example where this great spangled fritillary butterfly, prior to the kicking this monitoring network off, we had very few records on the left there, as you can see. And now, to date, we have almost the whole state filled with observation of that particular butterfly. I mean, I think it was known that they were common, but we didn't know exactly how common they are. So, or how widely distributed they are in the state. So the public input is really powerful. There's also frog call surveys that you can do. You can record it on your phone in particular areas during different times of the year. We're very interested in northern leopard frogs, Fowler's toad, but any frog species that you can record. It's useful information. Sometimes it's tracking the timing of their breeding. Sometimes it's just, we have gaps in our data, and so we may not have data and records of wood frogs in a particular area, but they're likely through most of the state. So that's a fun one to do. It's fairly easy with no real equipment needs other than a cell phone and a flashlight most of the time. And for turtles in particular, vernal pools are just critical for blandings and spotted turtles mostly. But reporting vernal pools, they're just, unfortunately, they can get disturbed or even filled before we even know that they exist. And so, but vernal pools can really be a sign that, maybe that's a place we need to look for blandings or spotted turtles, especially if they're in the range and they have these other wetlands in the area. So there's a whole manual on our website on how to identify them and how to report them. And then there's a form that you can download and fill out if you do find a vernal pool. And again, all this information goes into, conservation is the ultimate goal here. And so I just wanted to plug NRCS as well, because NRCS provides incentives to private landowners to do habitat work for turtles, for at-risk turtles. So it can be a whole bunch of different things, from forest management to wetland buffers, timing of like haying, things like that. But these programs, they wouldn't be possible without the data there, because they can't fund projects if there's no information on, like, somebody may say, this looks like great blandings turtle habitat on my property, and I'd love to get incentivized for doing conservation actions, but there needs to be some information there to go on. So that that information makes these programs competitive for people. And a lot of them are really great. There's some great programs. Some of them can be just one-off actions that you can do. Sometimes they're whole, more holistic, property-wide stewardship plans and things like that. And so that's all I got. I don't want to make sure I leave enough time for Nate to talk a little bit more about iNaturalist and the other ways of reporting. And so I think we'll hold off on questions until Nate's done. Is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Josh.
Okay, let me just stop sharing real quick.
Cool. Is everyone seeing my slides okay? Great. Cool. So, yeah, Josh had mentioned that they had a database for RAARP that was similar to iNaturalist. So both are similar in that they're biodiversity databases, but they have some slight differences. And so I'm going to go through some of those differences and similarities and ways that you can use both to benefit both yourself and for conservation of turtles in our region. So first, if you're not familiar, what is iNaturalist? By their own definition, iNaturalist is an online social network of people sharing biodiversity information to help each other learn about nature. I would say it's maybe slightly nerdier. It's maybe the nerdiest social network I know of. It's a really great resource for learning about organisms that are around you. Sort of the four core components are making observations of organisms, learning about species around you. There's a whole community-based identification system, so people can identify your observations, or you can identify others' observations. And then the end result is totally open data that's usable by everyone. So it's been used for a ton of different research projects. A bunch of new species have been described based on iNaturalist observations, and there have even been species that were thought to be extinct that have been found to still be present just from iNaturalist observations. So why use iNaturalist? So it's a great way to submit biodiversity data, and that sounds kind of dry, but it's also fun and a great learning tool. So it can help you figure out what a particular organism is if you don't know what it is. It also keeps records of all your sightings. So for me, I always take pictures of the first morning cloak I see every year. And you can go back and say, oh, last year, when did I see my first morning cloak? And pull that up really quickly rather than having to remember it or keep it in a journal and have to flip through pages. You can also see others' sightings. So in the picture on the slide, I actually have that's the Harris Center headquarters, and all of those dots are different iNaturalist observations just at the Harris Center headquarters. If you've ever been here, we have a very small meadow, but within that little meadow, we've made over 2,000 observations and we've seen over 700 species of living things. So those different dots indicate different types of organisms. Green is plants, I believe blue is birds, red are insects, and then purple are fungi. And it's a great way to contribute to science in a fun and informal way. Making iNaturalist observations is really quick and easy, and you don't need to be an expert to make those observations. So you may be asking, what is an observation? So an observation is any evidence of a living thing, and the most common form is photos or a photo, and that can be of the organism itself, or it can be evidence of the organism, such as tracks and scat. So this picture is actually a picture of turtle tracks that I took a few years ago. For birds that are a little harder to photograph, bird song or calls can be useful, can also be very useful for frogs and toads, that sort of thing. And so there's a web app, and you can really easily upload observations from there. Or if you like to use a camera, you can also upload observations on the website. And basically, what an observation does is says that this organism was present at this location on this date. So all of that probably sounds pretty similar to RAARP, and that's because it is. So some of the similarities and differences. So for RAARP, you're submitting your data via forms and email, eventually, hopefully another web portal. It's a little bit more detailed, and that is submitted directly to state biologists. When you send it in, it's going to the state, and it gets directly used in conservation planning, like Josh was talking about. And it's also used for fine scale location tracking. So we saw those maps. So it's at the town scale, or lots of times, especially for rare species, it's used at the finer level for a particular location, be that a wetland or a complex of vernal pools, that sort of thing. iNaturalist, on the other hand, it's submitted via the app or on the website. It uses identifications that are crowdsourced. And so people on iNaturalist range from total amateurs to certified experts. There are lots of state botanists that use iNaturalist and just enjoy identifying people's observations, for example. The data is usable by anyone. Not all of the data is visible to exactly where that is, and I'll get into that in a second, but it is open source. It gets sent to a global biodiversity database. And if you ever wanted to do research on a particular species or group, you could access that data. And it is, I would say, more useful by researchers for coarse scale location information, particularly with rare species, where their exact location is going to be obscured on the website. So one other point is that iNaturalist has a higher volume of data submissions. So there's a lot of data gaps existing in RAARP, like Josh was talking about. So RAARP has, in terms of turtles exclusively, RAARP has an average of 300 submissions per year, whereas on iNaturalist in the state of New Hampshire, there's about 650 observations made of turtles. So on the left here, I have a map of the iNaturalist observations for musk turtles in New Hampshire. And then on the right, that is put out by the state. Those are all the records that they have, at least as of 2021. And you can see these dark gray spots are ones that are current records. All the light gray ones are historic. And most of these iNaturalist observations were made within the last 5, sometimes 10 years, but a lot of these are fairly recent. And you can see there's some observations, particularly in the Monadnock region, where there's historic records in RAARP, but there's no current records. So the cool thing about this is a lot of the iNaturalist observations contain all the information you need to submit to RAARP, and we'll get into that in a second. So yeah, like I said, the essential information for RAARP submissions is contained within your iNaturalist observations most of the time, and they can be a really great way to document species quickly and then submit to RAARP later. So in terms of the stuff that is essential in RAARP, it's species identification, observation date, location, and a photo is a really great way to verify that it's that particular species. And every iNaturalist observation should have that information. Other things RAARP asks for in a little bit more detail is like habitat characteristics and that sort of thing, which you could record in the notes on iNaturalist. But the most important things are the identification, date, and location. So just getting into making an observation. So I have two screenshots here. The one on the left is from the mobile app, and the one on the right is from the website. They're both pretty similar. You add photos or audio, sorry for the typo there. And then below that, it'll say, what did you see? That you can see in the app screenshot there. And you could add an identification for the species. If you take a photo that's geo-referenced, like a lot of our phones do, it will automatically import that location information for you, as well as the date and the time. And then for sensitive species, because turtles are susceptible to poaching and other threats, we just want to make sure we obscure our locations. iNaturalist does that automatically for rare species, but it's always good to just do it as an added precautionary measure. So to do that, on your app, there's a little globe icon that says location visibility. It will default to public, and you can change that to obscured. And then on the website, there's a left-hand column that you can click on, and it'll say public or obscured. Even if this is a rare species, when you submit it, it would say public, but it gets auto-obscured when you submit the information. But this is a really great way, and it's really important to just do this as an added precautionary measure. So this is from the website. We're looking at the screenshot here, and you can tell your observation is obscured. If you look below the map, there's a little eyeball icon. If that wasn't obscured, that'd be a point. But if you look at the map, since this is your observation, you could see the exact location. Whereas if you looked at somebody else's observation, this is Miles, who works at the Harris Center. He submitted a painted turtle. He has this observation obscured, and it shows that blue polygon. And so that obscures the sighting to, it's about 140 square mile area instead of a precise location. So it spans over several towns, and that's to help protect the species from people finding out the exact location. It can be very difficult if it's across 6 towns rather than just a point, for example. So in terms of species that were obscured, it's the ones that Josh was talking about that have some conservation level. So box turtle, wood turtle, spotted turtle, Blanding's turtle. It also doesn't hurt to obscure musk turtle observations. They're a little bit less common in the state, although they are secure as of now. You don't necessarily need to obscure painted turtles or snapping turtles or introduced turtles. I would say one case in which you would consider obscuring the observation if it was one of those common species is if you see it nesting, if you have a picture of it laying eggs, that sort of thing. It might be a good idea to obscure it. And then when in doubt, obscure. So you can submit observations of things that you don't know the identification of. Say, I didn't know this was a wood turtle. You could still submit it, and I would just manually obscure the location of that just in case. So the key takeaways, iNaturalist is a great platform to quickly document turtles and other species. I didn't mention this, but iNaturalist can be used for all taxa. It can be used for anything living from plants to fungi to turtles and frogs. iNaturalist observations contain the necessary information for reporting to RAARP, and many pre-existing observations represent data gaps in the RAARP system. So if you are an iNaturalist user and you have sightings of turtles, you could always go onto the state website and look at the records that are in there. And you could say, oh, I have a picture of a painted turtle in this town where it's historic. I'll submit it to RAARP. And that's really great information to send in. And then most importantly, turtles are sensitive, so be sure to obscure rare species observations. And with that, do we have any questions?
We have a bunch of questions. So, thank you both so much for sharing all of this great information. And there's a ton of good follow-up questions in the chat for both of you. Um, so maybe I'll start with some of the kind of data submission questions that people are asking. Um, One from Sherry is she is wondering um, if you can expect to hear back if you make a report to RAARP. Um, how do you know it's been received, or do you?
Yeah, I can take that. So, and I didn't really talk about this much, but every single um, so turtle record that comes in, for example, um, we the turtle biologist has to verify that entire observation. So we need to verify it with a picture to make sure it's the species that they are saying it is. There's lots of misidentification with turtles and a lot of wildlife. So that's a big one. And that the location is what they're describing. So we have a section in there that describes location. So if they're saying, saw this turtle on our lawn, and then the coordinates they provided is, somewhere like, on a beach, then it's just, we have to follow up and get that information corrected. So all that information is verified. So it takes some time. And so, every year I have 300 records or so to go through, and that's not including all of the observations we get from like environmental consultants and other people monitoring turtles and other wildlife in the state. And so you may not hear back because it sometimes we have a very short period of time in the winter before field seasons and things happen, where we can get all that information into the database. And really, we're just kind of reaching out to the people where there's some question about what they saw, where they saw it, et cetera. So just because you don't hear back from us doesn't mean your record isn't going into the database and being recorded.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Another question, I think for you is Scott was asking, does the state look at iNaturalist? Can you use the data that is submitted through that platform, or at all?
So right now, not much. I do keep an eye on it from time to time because if something like an eastern box turtle is reported, then I'd want to get that information because that's one particular species where the location is really important and it may help us find others. But in general, we don't have a good like way to get the accurate location that we need, like pinpoint coordinates, and that data into our database. I'm hoping that we can get there, but that's sort of a behind the scenes data sharing agreement, and I'm currently not the person who's overseeing that stuff, and so there's conversations happening to figure out what the best approach is moving forward. Um, so yes and no.
Thanks, Josh. And I want to mention, oh, I'm getting a weird feedback. Dallas of New Hampshire Turtle Rescue chimed in the chat. I just want to mention her comment. That she says preferred would be to obscure all turtle locations, only send specific locations to New Hampshire Fish and Game. Not everybody knows whether something's a rare species or not. So to err on the side of caution, their recommendation is to obscure them all. She's also saying, I'm not sure if you can speak to this, Nate, that if something isn't listed to species, so for instance, you didn't know exactly what species it was, you only knew it was a turtle, and it's listed as turtles and tortoises, that then it isn't obscured at that. High level. Is there anything you want to follow up with about that, Nate?
Yeah, that's correct. So that was why in one of my slides about submitting data, I had mentioned when in doubt, obscure the location, is because if you don't have that identified to species, for example, for some of them it might also be genus. Um, but if you have it identified at the higher level because you don't know what particular species it is, it doesn't automatically obscure the location because it doesn't know it's a rare turtle species. When it's identified to turtles and tortoises, it could be anything from a snapping turtle to a Blanding's turtle. So if you don't know the particular species, it's definitely good to obscure the location for sure. And yeah, it is good to be cautious. And so um, when there's any question, you should obscure the location.
Yeah, and to come back to the other question about INAT versus RAARP, I think, one thing that maybe Josh or Nate could comment on this or correct me. I tend to think of the conservation value of that observation. It's a little extra effort to put it through RAARP, so it takes a little extra time to email that. And so for me, I think about if it's a at-risk species like a wood turtle, or if I'm finding a species that's dead on a road that could help to identify these road mortality hotspots. Those are the ones that I personally prioritize for making sure that I'm submitting definitely to RARP. Um,
Can
and
I just add
ideally in
one
both.
other thing?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. I just wanted to add to that. There is some legislation that's happened recently that's going to require a little bit more verification, not necessarily change anything the way that the way that we do any of it, but it's a little bit more like under scrutiny, and so the the information really has to be accurate. And so I don't have the kind of control over that accuracy and verification with iNaturalist. So records that come through RAARP, that's the information. That's really the only information that we can use right now to get into the natural heritage database that's used for environmental review, that's used for science and conservation. And so just keep that in mind. That and I hope we can work through some of these things. But again, um, we may be even more limited in terms of the data that we can use. And having landowner information, having contact information, all that stuff, we may potentially need for it to be included in the database. That's all.
Thanks, Josh. Um, Last question about related to reporting. Anthony is wondering if there's any non-native turtles that we should be looking out for in New Hampshire to report potential, um, invasions isn't the right word, but turtles that are being brought into the state or concerns about non-native turtles.
Yeah. So there's two concerns there. So and there's really two species that we're worried about. And so red-eared sliders and yellow-bellied sliders are the most commonly introduced into New Hampshire. They're southern turtles. They're farmed. They're common in pet stores. People like to have them for pets for a little while, and they find out they're really hard to take care of, and changing water and feeding it becomes a burden. And people, instead of finding another home for them, they'll just release them, not really knowing that they don't have, that they're not native and they don't have the right habitat. Um, and so there's a chance over time, especially with climate change, that they could be more successful in New Hampshire and outcompete some of our native turtles. Right now, they seem to be limited by the length of the winters we have, but that could change. The other big thing with those two species is where they're coming from: turtle farms and pet stores. They seem to be the main reservoirs for some pathogens that can be transmitted into our native populations. There's a whole variety of viruses. There's bacteria and fungus as well. They can be introduced, and so that's not a good thing, obviously. So I would encourage reporting those species, especially if you're in the southern part of the state. Right now, we're really just seeing those species in like areas like Nashua, Manchester, Dover, And they pop up here and there. But there has been some documented breeding, so successful, egg laying and hatchlings. So we want to watch that. But we don't have any real plans as of right now to manage the species, but we want to watch it carefully.
That's really great info. Thank you. Last few are kind of more turtle conservation and ecology questions, but feel free if anyone else has questions that haven't been asked yet to pop them in the chat. But Sherry's wondering if we know about whether lights near wetlands affect turtle hatchlings or freshwater turtle hatchlings the way that they do with sea turtles. Is that a concern for our communities?
I don't have any good data on that. I will say that it does seem to affect amphibian breeding. And so for blandings and spotted turtles, they rely on these vernal pool species like spotted salamander and wood frog egg masses. So early spring, they're desperate for sunshine and they're desperate for food. And they go to these vernal pools because there's a great food source in those egg masses. So if areas are being lit up and amphibian, breeding numbers are going down, then that could affect the turtles. In general, I think that, if you have a wetland that's completely lit up, it's not going to be good for a whole variety of wildlife. And that, I guess, just decrease in biodiversity could affect rare turtle populations.
Thank you. I think our last question is a good one to end on because I suspect it's something we will all come across in the coming month or two. Um, Delaney would like to know if you come across a turtle crossing a road, what is the best way to help it? And I guess that's most a question for Josh.
So, if it's safe to do so, get that turtle off the road in the direction it was heading. And so, obviously you can't do that if it's a highway with a Jersey barrier or something like that. But if you put it back where it came from, after you leave, that turtle's going to turn around and it's going to beeline back across the road. Turtles have very high sight fidelity, so they typically repeat their pattern every year. So they go to the same nesting area every year. They go to the same foraging wetlands every year. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they know what they're doing, even though it doesn't seem like it because they're on a road, but they're trying to get to something and nothing's really going to stop them except for a car. So that's the best you can do. Get it off get it as far away from the road as you can so it can get cover and get on its way without being seen or harmed. But yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, and we'll send a link out with the recording that there's New Hampshire Turtle Rescue has a great webpage about how to help turtles across a road as well. So we'll send out some more information on that because I suspect we will all be in the position of being able to help turtles in that way this month and next month, especially as the females are seeking nest sites. So I think that is all of our questions, but thank you so much to Josh and Nate for sharing these tools with us. And I'm not going to ask Anthony's last question about reporting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but that's pretty funny. But thank you so much for sharing these tools with us. And and thank you to everyone for joining us. I really hope that this inspires you to get out there and not just take pictures, but to share them with folks who can use them to help protect our beloved turtles. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you out there.
Thanks, you, everybody.